main road that connects the two countries is now lined with mines. Stepping outside could be deadly. Alexander Tsis, the commander of the local territorial defense brigade, said that since the February 24th Russian invasion, Ukrainian forces have been preparing for possible offensive from Belarus.
We are today like one organism, and everyone knows what step to take and how to maneuver.
He said that at this point, Ukrainian forces feel confident to defend the country.
We feel incredible support from the local population and local government. We got a lot of support in military equipment from our partners. We are preparing our soldiers, so we are ready.
Colonel Anton Kvetkovsky shared the Ukrainian intelligence assessment that the Belarusian military is not designed to offensive action. Ukrainians, however, don't take the risk of an offensive maneuvers lightly. In coordination with Russian forces, Belarus can make strikes, and Ukrainians are preparing themselves.
The situation on the border is under control.
The local topography makes it almost impossible to cross into Ukraine from Belarus by ground. Vitaly Koval, the governor of the Rivne region that borders Belarus, explained the reality on the ground.
As you can see, on the left are the swamps. They are impossible to cross. We have 92 kilometers of them. So the enemy should understand that they can't beat nature and God. These swamps help us. In addition, we have over 1,000 small and big rivers in the region with bridges, and they serve as a natural defense for us.
Ukraine and Belarus share a 1,000-kilometer border. In February, Russian forces used Belarus as launchpad for their attack on Ukrainian capital Kyiv. Since the invasion, the Belarusian territory became a base for war logistics and rocket launches. Alexei Danilov, secretary of the National Security and Defense Council, told VOA that the Ukrainian government takes the threat seriously.
The risks are there. We have never underestimated them. The issue is that the Russian Federation occupies Belarus at the moment. We are prepared for any scenario, including Belarus.
In Belarus so far, Moscow and Minsk have set up a joint military unit that has held several exercises. But Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, a pariah in the West who relies heavily on Moscow for support, seems reluctant to enter the war in Ukraine. Observers say that committing Belarusian troops to fight in Ukraine would be deeply unpopular at home and could also mean the end of Lukashenko's rule.
Miroslava Gongadze, VOA News, Ukraine-Belarus border.
And joining us for more on that story is VOA correspondent Jessica Stone. She joins us live from Washington. Jessica, great to have you back. Now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky met with President Joe Biden and delivered an impassioned speech to a joint session of Congress on Wednesday. Why is this timing so crucial? It has, of course, been billed as a historic visit.
And it was indeed a historic visit, not just because it sent wide signals around the world of the solidarity between the U.S. government and the Ukrainian government, but because Washington is poised to make some very significant decisions with respect to the war in Ukraine. Even at this hour, the House of Representatives just preparing to meet right now on a large spending bill that will include $45 billion in Ukrainian funding, both military and humanitarian. And that is more than the $37 billion request that President Biden initially made. President Biden also announced during that visit, of course, that he will be sending Patriot missiles to Ukraine, something that Volodymyr Zelensky has long asked for because they are able to intercept both short and long-term missiles and could provide some level of protection to cities like Kyiv. So far, the U.S. has provided, $68 billion in assistance to Ukraine, and much of the funding, as I said earlier, must be passed by the end of today because it is in that large spending bill that is before the House of Representatives, passed late yesterday by the Senate.
Also, Jessica, now House Minority Leader Republican Kevin McCarthy has said no blank check for Ukraine. So what are the prospects for future support for Ukraine in the new Congress? We know that the dynamics are going to change in the month of January.
Very true, Neha. And of course, that's the other piece of why this visit was so significant right now, because it provides some pressure on those Republicans who may be waffling in the House of Representatives on passing the funds for Ukraine. It's seen by some as a last chance to have undivided support in the U.S. Congress for funds to Ukraine, because there is a division, as you note, in the Republican Party. There are some that say we don't want to continue funding foreign wars, making an analogy, which some would say is a false one, to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. But Ohio Congressman Warren Davidson is an example of someone who says, look, I don't want to keep sending money over to Ukraine because I think it just encourages the war to be expanded and not to be contracted, which is really what we want in the end. House Minority Whip Steve Scalise of Louisiana, who will get a more powerful position in the new Congress, he was asked this week point blank, would you continue funding money to Ukraine? And he said only if it's much more heavily scrutinized. But then you have Republicans that represent a different perspective, such as Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who said, look, no, this visit by Zelensky, it's a reminder that there is an American taxpayer need to support Ukraine. He called helping Ukraine a direct investment in reducing Russian President Vladimir Putin's ability to threaten the U.S. and its allies. And he also addressed those concerns of oversight, saying, look, there has been 3 inspector generals looking at these funds going over to Ukraine, and that there will be even more oversight provided as this money is provided to Ukraine. So there's certainly a counter argument from Republicans, such as Mitch McConnell, who, of course, is a powerful voice in the Republican Party.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for all those details, Jessica. But please do stay on with us. We want to come back to you in just a moment to discuss our next story. Uncertainty over the migrant crisis on the U.S. southern border continues to grow as Texas Governor Greg Abbott deploys the National Guard along a key stretch of the Rio Grande River. Cesar Contreras reports from El Paso in Texas.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott deployed more than 500 National Guard troops, along with state police and Border Patrol agents, along the banks of the Rio Grande in a key stretch of the border known as Chihuahuita, an area between El Paso, Texas, and Ciudad Juarez, the Mexican city across the border from it. The troops are lining the riverbank with barbed wire to stop migrants from entering the United States through unauthorized entry points. But with Title 42 still in effect, allowing for immediate expulsion of most immigrants, the authorized entry points are also closed for all intents and purposes. Meanwhile, nonprofit organizations say they have no room in their shelters to house the migrants who have already entered the country near El Paso.
We had to remove the bookstore, clear the hallways in our church to be able to provide shelter, especially with the current weather conditions. We do not want people on the streets, but the demand has exceeded our capacity. We opened a warehouse across the street where we're moving many families, men and women as well. We are trying to give them the best we can with what we have.
The community is helping with donations while migrants continue to seek shelter from the frigid nighttime temperatures in the region. Many here say they don't mind the overcrowding as long as they have a roof over their heads and a place where they can sleep safely.
It is very tight here, you know what I mean? It's partly difficult, but also good. Destiny requires us to get settled and work. At least I am the type of person who would like to work to get my family ahead.
Governor Abbott said he will strengthen border enforcement until there is a final decision on Title 42. For Cesar Contreras in El Paso, Texas, Veronica Villafañe, VOA News.
VOA's Jessica Stone is still with us. Jessica, Title 42 was set to expire on Wednesday. The pandemic-era policy allowed Washington to prevent migrants as a way of combating COVID-19. What is Washington's way forward now?
Well, it's a classic Washington move, which is to say delay. The White House has asked for the policy to now expire on December 27th, giving it time to prepare for the end of Title 42. They say they need that extra time, and it certainly appears to be the case by the story that you just saw there. Right now, border officials can continue to turn back migrants until that date, and this is, of course, under a court order responding to a request by 19 Republican-led states, which said, listen, we can't handle the influx of the migrants that we expect to see after the lifting of Title 42. Over the weekend, El Paso's mayor saying that he was expecting 20,000 migrants who he says have lined up across the border to cross in as soon as it's lifted, that they just don't have the capacity because, as you saw there, the facilities are already overcrowded. At this point, the White House solution is to ask Congress for $3.5 billion for more holding facilities and for more Border Patrol agents.
Right. Now, Jessica, last week, the Congress passed a continuing resolution to fund the government through Friday at midnight. Now, members of the House are racing to pass a $1.7 trillion budget by that deadline. What do we know about it? Will it be passed in time to avoid a government shutdown?
It's a very good question. It is, as I said earlier, just starting to be debated in the House of Representatives. About 10 minutes ago, the House opened its session. But look, there's a big winter storm here as well. And so about 220, so half of the House of Representatives have already left town, saying that they would give their votes by proxy to other members who will stay behind and vote in their stead. So it's a really large bill. It's very unlikely that anybody has read it all in its entirety. It's more than 4,000 pages. But here are some highlights. All importantly, that $45 billion in funds to Ukraine. There's going to be some more defense spending, an increase of 10%. Also $40 billion in disaster aid to communities in the United States affected by tornadoes and hurricanes. A ban on the use of TikTok on federal devices, and an overhaul of federal election laws that will will prevent a future president from overturning election results. And of course, it also is expected to fund the government through September 2023, which is at its base level what this bill is supposed to do. But so all kinds of other things get crammed in there at the last minute because it is, as I say, a must-pass bill by midnight tonight.
Well, clearly a lot at stake there. On that note, Jessica, thank you so much for getting us all the big stories from Washington today. Always a pleasure talking to you. And on that note, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you as well.
Thank you.